New York, Boston, Chicago, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. But the Democratic leaders of those cities, who say sanctuary city policies keep their cities safer because illegal immigrants are willing to work with police without fear of arrest, say everyone is still welcome in their cities. Mayor Lightfoot said that illegal immigrants have power in this situation and don't have to open their doors if someone knocks and doesn't have a warrant signed by a judge. And she reminded her community that Chicago has banned its police officers and city employees from helping any federal agents in any civil immigration enforcement effort.
That's Fox's Molly Hennenberg. A meeting was held Sunday in Germany on the sidelines of the Munich Security Conference on continuing problems in Libya. Major concerns there include arms sales and continued fighting. At least one state may issue an apology to Japanese Americans.
California's legislature is expected to approve a resolution to offer an apology to Japanese Americans for the state's role in the internments during World War II. During the war, 10 internment camps were set up, 2 in California. More than 120,000 Japanese Americans were held nationwide between 1942 and 1945. The apology is expected to target actions of California's legislature during that time for supporting President Franklin D. Roosevelt's establishment of the camps by way of executive order. In 1988, the U.S. government formally apologized and paid $20,000 in reparations to each victim. Ann Carrick, Fox News.
The NBA All-Star Game in Chicago going to Team LeBron over Team Giannis. The final there 157-155. I'm Paul Stevens. This is Fox News.
Hafa-day. This is Congressman Michael Nicholas. Our veterans deserve the best, and I'm working hard to make sure they receive what they earned defending our freedom. If you need help receiving the benefits you earned from the VA or the Defense Department, please call my office at 475-6453 or go online at stnicholas.house.gov. On behalf of a grateful community, thank you for your service.
This ad was paid for with official funds from the office of Congressman Michael Nicholas.
Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie is brought to you by Bank Pacific, banking on the Pacific for 65 years.
Welcome to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, the only show on talk radio where common sense is a lot more common. Phone lines are now open at 888-TALK. That's 888-8255. And now, The Point proudly brings you Tall Tales with Senator Bob Klitzkie.
A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That was the rule on Friday. It's the rule on Monday. It'll be the rule on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And as far into the future as we can see. The Tall Tales program is a firm advocate of the Second Amendment of the United States Constitution and the other parts of the Bill of Rights of the United States Constitution, as well as the Constitution itself. This is a conservative, interactive radio talk show that sets forth what most would consider to be conservative values. If you are not a conservative, you're certainly welcome in our international radio listening audience. It may be a curative experience for you, so please read the label on the bottle before you take the Tall Tales pill, because you may wind up with a result that your friends might not recognize. Be that as it may, we do this every day, 1600 in the afternoon till 1800, Monday through Friday. Today is a national holiday, but we don't take a day off from Tall Tales here. Today, we consider days when there's no Tall Tales as anything but a holiday. For us, every day is a holiday. The Tall Tales is on the air. Right, Real Joe Cruz?
Yes, sir.
And we had a little bit of a scare last week. There was a possibility that there might not be a Tall Tales today. The Real Joe Cruz and I were pretty fearsome, but as it turned out, it was a false alarm, because here we are, President's Day, a national holiday, and here we are, big as life, twice as ugly, here on Tall Tales. As usual, I'm going to start out with Zemi Ikotny. Zemi Ikotny, my backwards bilingual play on words that translates to meet the press. And as usual, I start out by beating up on the Daily News for not running a local editorial on that part of the newspaper that it calls, somewhat euphemistically, its editorial page. It should be called the page where we run stuff from USA Today and Gannett News Service. Today they've got something, well, it's not from USA Today. It's from Nancy Anderson, the executive director of the Salin Foundation, Inc. And it's all about climate change, 5 reasons for hope about climate change. But it doesn't pick up any of the 5 reasons that I have hope. Number 1 of my 5 reasons to be hopeful about climate change would be, I hope that people will stop talking about it. Climate change is not something that is caused by my driving a 1992 Rocky instead of a Toyota Prius. Yeah, I know that's blasphemy for those folks out there in the left who embrace climate change and say the only answer is for the government to have the power to deal with bad people like Klitzkie, who's not concerned in the slightest about his carbon footprint. Okay, well, so much for the Daily News for today. Then we go to the Post, who day in, day out usually writes pretty good editorials. And here's the Post's idea for today. Suggestion to hold off Hong Kong game valid in light of virus concerns. Governments across the globe are taking action and setting policies to try to protect their citizens from the new coronavirus, recently named COVID-19. Guam doesn't have a single confirmed case of coronavirus, but many of our residents are concerned that someone visiting Guam might bring the deadly disease here. As of February 16, CNN had listed the number of confirmed cases as more than 69,000 infected, with a death toll in China at 1,665. There have been 4 deaths outside China, bringing the total to 1,669. On Saturday, an 83-year-old American woman who was a passenger from the cruise ship MS Westerdam tested positive for COVID-19 after flying into Malaysia from Cambodia, Reuters reported. Governor Leon Guerrero was on point when she denied the entry of the cruise ship after it had boarded 800 passengers from Hong Kong just days prior. So let's have a round of applause for Governor Leon Guerrero. The United States State Department asked Governor Leon Guerrero, can you let that ship, the Holland American Line, Westerdam, can you let it dock in Guam and discharge its passengers? Because they've been turned away by a couple of other ports. And Governor Leon Guerrero's response, as I understand it, was rather short. I would quote, nope. And the Westerdam continued on. At the point that the State Department wanted the Westerdam to dock here, None of the passengers had tested positive, but the governor chose to err on the side of caution, citing the safety of the island. The Daily Post also questioned last week why Hong Kong's national basketball team and its entourage would be allowed on Guam for a tournament this week, treating the team differently from the cruise ship passengers. Now, isn't there an equal protection dimension there? Is it fair to treat people from a ship differently than the way you treat people who are from a basketball team? Do we detect an anti-basketball bias here? If it had been a baseball team instead of a basketball team, would we have let them in? Interesting questions. On Saturday, the Guam Visitors Bureau urged government of Guam officials to use their authority to keep Guam from hosting the Hong Kong contingent and to postpone the game. In a release, GVB event sponsor expressed its support for expressed its support for the tournament, but reiterated the importance of the Guam brand and its reliance on keeping the island a safe destination. Yeah, as far as our tourist trade is concerned, you know, we want the tourists to keep coming, because when tourists come here, they bring money and they spend money. And right now, tourism is the number one part of our economy. It's the biggest part of our economy. And for us, the statistic that would really matter as far as the number of cases are concerned is 1. So long as we are able to hold ourselves as a coronavirus-free place, there's a certain attraction. But if we had 1 case, we can't say that anymore. And some tourists probably would not be assuaged by our statement, well, it's only 1 case. As of press time, we hadn't heard publicly from the governor's office or the leadership of the Guam legislature. Bank of Guam, the island's national team's title sponsor, had also been contacted but not responded. Now, let me see. The Bank of Guam and Governor Leon Guerrero. Did the Bank of Guam respond? No. Did Governor Leon Guerrero respond? Is there a conspiracy going on here? The Bank of Guam, the Leon Guerrero Family Bank. We don't want this is back to the editorial here. We don't want the virus to reach Guam. Any and all efforts that will help secure our island from the entry of the virus should be taken. Even smaller nations such as Palau and the Federated States of Micronesia have taken steps to curb arrivals from places where there are confirmed cases of the virus. FSM President David Penuelo announced over the weekend, quote, "It is in the best interest of the health and safety of our citizens and residents to reimpose the 14-day delay or quarantine requirement for travelers coming from countries, states, or territories with confirmed cases of the coronavirus." Palau has banned the entry of travelers from China, Macau, and Hong Kong until March 31, 2020. One good thing Guam has done is educate the public on proper hygiene, such as washing hands and staying home when sick. But as we said last week, we need to do more to actually keep the island secure from the coronavirus's entry. When hours of the U.S. government's ban on foreigners arriving from mainland China and requiring a 14-day quarantine for U.S. citizens and residents who would travel to China, Guam allowed the entry of dozens of Chinese tourists into the island. Has public health been monitoring these travelers? Have our local health authorities conducted follow-up tests or checkups? A U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention press briefing on Friday shared the information that testing a passenger once isn't going to be enough. The CDC expects someone who is infected to show symptoms at any time within 14 days. Someone exposed to the virus might not show symptoms right away, according to the CDC, and added, quote, testing on day 1 or 2 or 3 might produce a negative result. However, it could mean that the virus hasn't established itself sufficiently in the system to be detected by the test. So if a person tests negative once, it's not clear that it's a true negative. The test doesn't inform public health actions or clinical care. In fact, the negative test results could provide a false sense of security. With the incubation period being up to 14 days, one test at any given point in time only tells you if someone is infected at that one moment, CDC stated. In light of what CDC is saying, it's not a stretch to question why Guam is still hosting the Hong Kong sports team and its entourage. E.J. Calvo, president of CBC and the head coach of Guam's national team, blamed the Post for GBC's decision. Yeah, blame the Post. You're joining that select group now. Michael Bavacqua, Fernando Esteves, and E.J. Calvo. Blame the Post. GVB management probably read an irresponsible piece of journalism. Whoa. That compares a cruise ship full of passengers that could not comply with screening requirements set by our federally imposed travel ban to a group of professional athletes legally traveling to Guam along with 4,000 other tourists daily from countries in Asia that must comply with requirements set forth by the travel ban. Sounds like you're working hard to generate confusion and fear in an attempt to sell papers. Whoa. Very disappointing. We absolutely share all concerns, but actually check facts and discuss risks with medical professionals, Calvo stated. The growing number of cases globally and the information for the CDC should be enough to warrant a postponement. This is about the safety of our island and its people. No, it's not. It's about basketball. You know, these kids have been practicing and playing basketball, and they've been looking forward to this tournament for a long, long time. And why should we disappoint them because of something because of bad journalism on the part of the Guam Post? It just doesn't seem fair. You know, I ought to pull a Nancy Pelosi. Here we are. Yeah, I'm going to pull a Nancy Pelosi right here, Real Joe Cruz. Are you ready? Are you ready for this, E.J. Calvo? There it is. I just pulled a Nancy Pelosi. That's what you do when somebody says something that you disagree with. You tear it up. Yeah, me and Nan, right? I'll probably get a free pass to San Francisco the next time I go. Get one of those maps that Nancy's gang hands out telling you where all the Taki is located on the sidewalk. Well, I suppose just tearing up today's issue of the Post is not going to be enough to satisfy the team. But, you know, being the host of Tall Tales, it's not an easy job. There aren't a whole lot of people that can handle it. I've only run into 2 in my entire life that could lift the burden required to be the host of Tall Tales. And one only did it sort of part-time. So when you come to a tough decision like this, Like, should Tall Tales back the Post with this idea, don't let those people in because it adds a risk, maybe a slight risk, but it adds a risk to the folks of the island on the one hand, and be a spoil sport when it comes to a basketball tournament? Or should I be a good guy and say, oh, come on, Post, stop this inflammatory stuff just to sell newspapers. Let the kids play. Well, as I said, it ain't easy being the host of Tall Tales. So, E.J. Calvo, tearing up that newspaper was just my attempt to sell this program to more listeners. I wasn't sincere. I didn't really mean it. I like the Post. I like it so much that here you go. E.J. Calvo. Another blue star for the Post. That takes the Post up to 174 blue stars. Yeah, good call, Guam Daily Post. And the fact that people come out and criticize you should only serve to heighten your interest to continue to write hard-hitting, truth-telling local editorials, unlike your so-called competition who hasn't said anything on its editorial page about coronavirus, smallpox, chickenpox, measles, mumps, the croup, anything like that. Okay, so from there we go to the card. And here's what I've got on the card today. I've got a new feature called Tall Tales versus The Burn. And I've got a holdover from Friday, Bavakwa versus Chamorro Culture. And a couple new ones. You'll like these. Out there in the LGBTQIA community, I've got Wall Street Journal versus Wokesters. And I've got the LGBTQIA community versus Butthead. And something that broke over the weekend, the Archdiocese versus Adrian Castrobel. And then some holdovers. Christine Boleto versus Governor Lou Leon Guerrero. I've got Chief Ignacio versus you. And Howard Hills versus Political Status. And let's see, I got another one on here too that somehow I didn't write down. Yeah, I've got Governor Leon Guerrero versus Governor Leon Guerrero. So they are on the card. Okay, so let me start out here with Tall Tales versus Burn. The burn. Do you feel the burn out there in socialist America? Yeah. And I suppose when I say burn, I should do the appropriate gesture like this, you know, flap my wings as though I were some kind of a seagull trying to get into the air. This is something I picked up from the WAPO of all places. And if you've been following Democrat politics at all, the Democrats have got their skivvies all bunched up because of the burn. Because they think the burn is so far to the left that other than having a really strong appeal to the squad, there aren't going to be a whole lot of Democrats that think he's the right guy to be the nominee, and they don't think he could beat Trump. So the mainstream Democrats are looking for somebody who's a little bit more moderate than the Burn. And, of course, this plays right into the Burn's hands, who holds himself out as this reformer populist who wants to take the Democrat Party out of the hands of the fat cats. So the WAPO runs this article here, 14 questions for Bernie Sanders, for the all you Sanderistas, right? Senator Bernie Sanders, an independent from Vermont, and by the way, he's not even a Democrat. You know, it's really interesting that a guy that doesn't even belong to the party wants to be the Democrat nominee. Bernie Sanders is a serious contender for the 2020 Democrat presidential nomination, arguably the front runner. Time to ask him a few questions. Number one, in 2016, you were one of only 2 non-Republican senators to back a bill from Rand Paul calling for an intrusive, quote, annual audit of the Federal Reserve, which former Fed Chairman Ben Bernanke, Wall Street critic Senator Elizabeth Warren, and the Obama administration opposed as a threat to central bank independence. So even Pocahontas disapproved of this idea of auditing the Fed. And of course, this has been a Rand Paul and Ron Paul initiative since Ron was in Congress. He sees the Federal Reserve Bank as one of the serious problems in the United States, and he would like to have it audited. And so would the burn. He went along with the Republicans on this. So the question for for the burn is, do you still favor this GOP-backed legislation, Mr. Bernie Sanders? Knowing that if you do, you're going to piss off some Democrats. Are you a man of principle, Bernie Sanders? Okay, so we'll put this aside, and I'll come back to question number 2 tomorrow. Okay, we go from here to let me just take a peek at Facebook. I noticed a couple of things peeking out of the corner of my eyes here. See what I got here. Rico's here. The other governor, Leon Guerrero, also known as Ken, is here. Sherry Iriarte is here. Thomas Tenorio Benatu is here. Jose Velez, it isn't clear if the Japanese tourists became infected while in Hawaii or arrived in Hawaii infected. Either way, the point is that he traveled inter-island while infected. Jose Leon comes along and says, is it true? It's the true Gov Guam in action. These crybabies like E.J. Calvo related to ex-Goober Calvo praying in the dark somewhere, knows nothing about it, knows nothing about the global fear. And Ishmael Velez, which makes me wonder, is there someone already sick on Guam and is afraid to speak up? And Ricky Paris used the term white supremacist. Well, you could be talking about Valentine's Day and Rick Paris would use the term white supremacist. Okay, short break, and we're going to come back to Bavacqua versus the Chamorro culture.
Hafaday, Guam. We'd like to invite you to join us February 23 for the Guahan Festival of Hope with Franklin Graham at the Guam Football Association soccer field next to Dedido Sports Complex. Franklin Graham will be on Guam to share a life-changing message of God's love and hope for every one of us. This hope-filled event will also feature musical performances by Grammy Award-winning singer-songwriter Michael W. Smith. Tommy Coombs Band, and Dennis Agianian. Don't miss this free, once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Come join us for an afternoon of music and a life-changing message of God's love and hope on February 23 at the Guam Football Association soccer field, starting at 4:30 p.m. Gates open at 3:30 p.m. Admission is free. For additional information and updates, visit us and like our Facebook page at Guahan Festival of Hope. See you there. God bless you and God bless Guam.
when an apology isn't really an apology and the effect that can have on the workplace. I'm Jerry Roberts, and at 7:20 a.m. on The Ray Gibson Show, we'll learn a valuable lesson from a company that apparently has learned nothing from a very public lesson they should have learned from.
You can find daily transcripts of The Extra Point at GuamTraining.com. Tune in every weekday morning at 7:20 for The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts, brought to you by Guahan Insurance Services and First Hawaiian Bank on 93.3 The Point. Now, more Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie. Spitting truth like watermelon seeds at a summer picnic. Call now, 888-TALK, 888-8255.
I started this item here, Bavakwa versus Chamorro culture, on Friday. It is based on Bavakwa's weekly column in the Daily News, and the title of the column was National Issues. Forgot to turn my volume down. And the title, the issue is abortion. And Bavakwa talks about the big abortion conflict that we had back in 1990, and the fact that we had the most restrictive abortion law in the United States in 1990 that was stricken by the court. And, of course, when people talk about the courts and abortions, the default court case is always Roe versus Wade, which really has, in a sense, been distinguished to the point that it's no longer the law on abortion anymore. But it's a convenient way to talk in terms of the United States Supreme Court going into the U.S. Constitution, finding a right of privacy that is possessed by those of the female sex and probably even the female gender, although I'm not real sure on that one, that gives them an absolute right to an abortion, at least during the first 3 months of pregnancy. Gets kind of complicated after that. So back in 1990, one of the things that was an issue was Guam sovereignty and a cultural flavor. And I think I'll probably be the one to make the statement that, as far as I know, pre-Hispanic Guam there was no such thing as abortion. That the abortion was not the anatomical equivalent of cockfighting, that everyone had the right to do it because it was, quote, part of the culture. In fact, I would have to say that it probably goes the other way, because Guam has been exposed to the Roman Catholic religion since 1668. And Guam, the people of Guam probably bought into Catholicism to a greater extent than just about any place else in the world where Catholicism was imported from the outside. And of course, one of the tenets of Catholicism is thou shalt not kill, and the thou shalt not kill goes to babies, unborn babies in the mother's womb. So that's kind of the framework in which this came up. And I'll pick back up in the column here. Bavakwa says, Guam commonly sees itself as just an extension of the U.S. And I made a comment on Friday, you know, how powerful words can be and how using just maybe one little word can change the entire context of a sentence. And I'll use the example again. Let me read this sentence two ways. First way, Guam commonly sees itself as an extension of the U.S. Second way, Guam sees itself as just an extension of the U.S. So the second one's a little bit derogatory. Now you're just an extension of the U.S. You aren't capable of thinking for yourselves. Guam commonly sees itself as just an extension of the U.S., so the debates in the U.S. over gun rights, Trump, climate change, etc. might naturally extend to Guam. They have Democrats and Republicans, and so do we, right? This isn't always the case. These debates sometimes become more contorted as they cross the Pacific. Sometimes they can line up, but other times they move and align differently, forming new conditions of identity. The big I word. Where what is liberal there is now conservative here. The prism of political discourse will form in a different way. It can be the same debate, but figures may move because of differences of culture, history, and the world around them. This anti-abortion law and the issue of abortion itself can be one of those things. I, Bavacqua says, am someone who aligns easily with the pro-choice abortion rights feminist side of the issue, giving me the opportunity to say, then you are outside the Chamorro culture, Michael Bavacqua. That's not part of our culture. If you're Chamorro, you don't believe in abortion, certainly not abortion rights. It's not part of the culture. He says, I am someone who aligns easily with the pro-choice abortion rights feminist side of this issue. However, this historical moment pulls me in different directions. Yeah, maybe it's because you're a hypocrite, Michael Bavacqua. I disagreed with the cultural arguments made by anti-choice advocates such as then Archbishop Apparon and then Senator Elizabeth Arreola, saying that abortion was against Chamorro culture. Well, we had a clarification on Friday. That isn't exactly what the bishop and Senator Arreola, that wasn't their position. But for ease of discussion, let's say that it was. And let's say that that's what Bavacqua thinks it was, that those two people advanced the culture argument, saying that abortion was against Chamorro culture. Then Bavacqua comes along and shows that he doesn't give a whip about Chamorro culture because he says, I don't see Catholicism as the alpha and omega of Chamorro culture. Yeah, it has been a very important part for centuries. I clarified, I'd say it's the one essential element of Chamorro culture. It's a stronger part of the culture even than the love for cockfighting, believe it or not. He says, it has been very important for centuries, but I don't think that it should dictate what is Chamorro or not. Now, who would be better suited to dictate what is and what isn't Chamorro, Real Joe Cruz? Do you know?
No.
His initials are Bavacqua.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. He's in a much better position to make that determination. He says, I don't think that the church should dictate what is Chamorro or not. For instance, I don't feel that the Catholic idea of the church being able to dictate what is right or not right for women's bodies, that's quite a mouthful. Dictate what is right or not right for women's bodies. That's what churches do. They lay down moral precepts and principles. And they say that, you know, if you want to be a believer in this religion, these are the things we believe in. If you don't want to believe in them, then you aren't a part of this religion. She says, I do not feel that the Catholic idea of the church being able to dictate what is right or not right for women's bodies is in line with Chamorro matrilineal notions of female empowerment. Now, I had to correct his vocabulary is out of control here. Matrilineal means that kinship is determined by the females in a particular group. And the readings that I've done, I have never found anybody who said that Chamorro, the pre-Hispanic Chamorro, was a matrilineal society. Maybe it's there. I haven't seen it. And then he goes on to say, Chamorro matrilineal notions of female empowerment. I think the whole idea of female empowerment is probably anathema to the Chamorro culture. I think probably what he's trying to say here is matriarchal, because the three words travel together. Matrilineal, kinship determined by the female. Matrilocal means that families settle with the female members of the group. Matriarchal means the woman wears the pants in the family. And I gave some examples of that. And he says that he doesn't think, correcting his misuse of the word, I don't feel that the Catholic idea of the church being able to dictate what is right or not right for women's bodies is in line with Chamorro matriarchal notions of female empowerment. I wonder if that's why, up until the modern era, Chamorro women tended to have so many children. That the large family, 50 years ago, the large family was the norm. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I knew a family from Dadido, 18 kids. That's a lot of kids. I wonder how Bavacqua would figure that would be in line with Chamorro matriarchal notions of feminine empowerment. But then we go on. The arguments that Apparon and Areola also made about American colonialism through abortion rights laws were not without merit. Yeah, all you got to do to get Bavacqua on your side is use the right words: colonialism, colonizer. Even if I agree with a particular edict from Washington, I don't necessarily agree that our relationship to the U.S., where Supreme Court decisions, acts of Congress, or executive orders apply to Guam, despite our being a colony. Well, you use the word despite, Michael. Actually, it's because we're a colony that Supreme Court decisions, acts of Congress, and executive orders apply here. I don't know if this is a reading, it's supposed to be a column in a newspaper or a reading comprehension test. And he goes on to say, this is the nexus of that conflict when debates move into the territories. Is it really a victory for Guam when colonial authority is enhanced? So what he's trying to say here is he likes Roe versus Wade because he's a pro-abortionist. And he doesn't think that the Catholic Church should dictate women's positions on abortion. So he's a feminist pro-abortionist. So Roe versus Wade gives him what he wants, but he doesn't like it. This is the nexus of that conflict when debates move into the territories. Is it really a victory for Guam when colonial authority is enhanced? Now, how is colonial authority enhanced by a Supreme Court decision holding that females have a right to abortion under certain circumstances? What you're saying is that any decision that the Supreme Court makes is either enhances colonial, they would always enhance colonial authority. Then he goes on to say, it is when you assume that whatever is good for the U.S. must be good for Guam. But what happens when the U.S. moves in a direction that you don't agree with or don't want, but your voice never even counted in that decision? Well, Michael Bavacqua, it happens all the time. It happens all the time. We have 330 million people in the United States. People living in the 50 states who meet the age and other requirements have the ability to vote. And I suppose when a person goes to vote for a representative in a Republican form of government, arguably his voice is heard? Practically no. Nobody cares what an individual says, how a single individual votes. It's just not how the system works. But the real point here, of course, is for Michael Bavacqua to show us all that he's woke. He's with women and reproductive health and the right of a woman to have an abortion if she wants to. And even though the colonizers' #1 court goes along with it, he doesn't like it. Okay, so I don't know. Did you want to speak up on this, Real Joe Cruz?
It's laughable, sir. I think that some people take on these social issues because they're lacking something in their own personal life that they can't. It's insurmountable for them. So they take on these big social issues so they look good to their friends and family.
I've seen that. I've known a lot of people in my lifetime who had some really radical social ideas, who had concluded that it would be much easier to change the whole world.
That's exactly what I mean, sir.
Yeah, much easier to change the whole world than to change their approach to life. Yeah. Well, I was going to allow you just to take a pass because if you didn't want to speak to that, I've got another Joe on the line here.
You got a bigger name on the line.
I've got another Joe, yeah. Good afternoon, another Joe.
Another average Joe.
Yes, sir.
Uncle Bob, so would you say that the governor looking for a pro-abortionist forensics, what's the actual title?
An abortionist. The governor was looking for an abortionist.
Would you say that's divisive?
I'd say it's very divisive.
Was it the exact wording, or was there a different description used? Someone who qualifies to do abortions, or what was it that was the actual wording used?
Well, here's what happened. We had 2 abortionists at one time. Both of them packed up and left the island. In order to be an abortionist, you must be a medical doctor. You must be admitted to practice medicine on Guam, and you must be willing to do abortions. Well, those 2 doctors left. None of the doctors that live on Guam will do abortions. They just say no to abortions. So we went for over 6 months, and we didn't have any recorded abortions at all. And our governor saw this as an emergency. Here we are, haven't had an abortion in 6 months. We've got to do something about this.
Was there complaints from anyone on island?
No
or was it just
complaints from anybody that I'm aware of. She was self-actuating there when she saw no report. So her answer to the problem was to tell Jane Flores, who is the director of the Bureau of Women's Affairs. Yeah, talk about a lofty title. That Jane Flores was to go out and beat the national bushes and find an abortionist for Guam. And Jane took to it like a duck to a June bug. She was on that like white on rice. She did. She made a Herculean effort, but she couldn't find an abortionist to come to Guam. So now we've gone for well over a year with no recorded abortions on Guam, and there's no end in sight to this. Another Joe.
Oh, shocking! Because no one is wanting to do that. But was there some pressure on our good governor, our honorable governor, from the liberal group stateside?
I wouldn't be surprised, but I don't know that to be a fact. She was in December of 1990. She was the president of the local women's abortion group. That was brought out on Friday and in an article in the paper. So she may have been getting some pressure from some of the pro-abortion gang on Guam. Another Joe, I got to take a break, but I'm glad you called and posed that question.
Thanks for your time, Bob.
Okay.
Cocoa Coffee Company is now available at Circle K. Single origin coffee beans carefully sourced and locally roasted to give you the freshest cup of coffee Guam has to offer. Grab a cup that's brewed every 30 minutes or purchase a bag of the locally roasted whole beans. Flavors now serving: light medium roasted Ethiopia and medium dark roasted Jamaican Blue Mountain. Exclusively available at Circle K. With every Cocoa Coffee Company purchase, a portion of the proceeds will go towards the Cocoa Recovery Program.
Wow, nice smile. So perfect and all.
Thanks. I owe it all to Dr. Robert Yang and his Smile team. They do wonders for a healthy, happy mouth.
Got teeth? Don't wait until they hurt. Schedule your routine checkup and cleaning with Dr. Yang and his Smile team. Suite 119 in the East-West Business Center, Upper Tumon. Call 647-8702 or 3.
The best thing that happened to teeth since toothpaste.
Dr. Yang and his Smile team.
They make smiles happen.
Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie is brought to you by Bank Pacific, banking on the Pacific for 65 years.
So Bavakwa talks in terms of not having your voice heard, and I pointed that that's a powerful statement to make in a stump speech. For instance, they don't hear our voices because we can't vote because of the colonizer, but. The whole idea of because you can vote means your voice is going to be heard. A single vote in the total scheme of things is not having your voice heard. It's a little bit more complicated than that. And Ishmael Velez pops up and helps out by saying, it happens all the time. We didn't get to vote on FESPAC. And it's still happening, meaning we didn't get to vote on it, but it's going to cost us $350,000 anyhow. Okay, we got another. This is another Joe?
No, it's just another Joe.
This is another Joe, not another Joe.
You're correct,
Okay.
sir.
Hello, another Joe.
Good, Bob. I'm sorry. This second time, but what I forgot to mention, what I wanted to mention was, I know of female Chamorros who are considered leaders of the families who are pro-life. So I'm not sure I understand what the issue is with Dr. Bavakwa.
The issue with him is that he isn't. That
He's pro-life?
Yeah, he is pro-abortion, and he doesn't think that the church, he doesn't think that being anti-abortion is part of the Chamorro culture, and he doesn't think that the church should dictate to women.
So shouldn't we take a poll of living Chamorro females, mothers, grandmothers on Guam and see what percentage of them are pro-life, and determine what their point of view is?
Well, I know that there are some pretty strong anti-abortion groups on the island, but the best poll is to see how many babies are born every year and how many abortions we have, and we have too many. And Tim called up on Friday and told us that the bulk of abortions are performed on Chamorro babies. So it's a serious problem, and
but you were saying there was no doctor to perform the abortions.
That's right. Yeah. Going back to the statistics before the abortionists left.
I see.
Yeah.
I think maybe Dr. Bavakwa might be satisfied if we show that there are activist Chamorros, and maybe he might be a little bit more understanding, maybe, or accepting if they were to say, hey, Chamorros come out on either side of these issues, but a lot of them might be pro-abortion, but a lot of them are definitely pro-life. As long as Chamorros come out and participate, maybe that would make Dr. Bavakwa happy, perhaps, or appreciative of. Maybe just sorry.
When you see an ideologue, oftentimes the facts don't have anything to do with his ideology. And as I pointed out, the purpose of this column is to do a few things. First of all, to show you that Michael Bavacqua is woke, that he's for reproductive health, for a woman's right to choose, for a woman to have an abortion if she wants one. And then to avoid cognitive dissonance, because he's also this great proponent of the Chamorro culture, for him to say, I'm pro-abortion, but Chamorro culture is against abortion, wouldn't sit with him very well. There'd be a classic cognitive dissonance. So he has to come out and say, you know, the fact that that so many Chamorros are Catholic doesn't mean that that's the Chamorro culture. The Chamorro culture, the matrilineal Chamorro culture, you know, empowered women. So he has to make up this fiction to avoid that cognitive dissonance. And then, of course, I suspect that whatever it is that he's talking about, anytime he can bash the colonizer or the colonizer's institutions, that's fair game regardless of what the major point is that he's trying to make. So that's the point of this column, not that Michael Bavacqua is in search of enlightenment.
I hear music. Is that music?
That's it. Thanks.
Is there another break?
Yeah, I got that big halftime show coming up, another Joe. So.
All right, thanks again, Kebab, and we'll chime in on this in the future again. Perspective. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
The Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
Scrutiny on Bloomberg. I'm Paul Stevens, Fox News. Former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg facing allegations of past sexual harassment as his campaign for the Democratic White House nomination continues.
He's going to have to answer for that and speak to it. Look, this is a time where voters are looking for a president who can lead us out of the days when it was just commonplace or accepted to have these kinds of sexist and discriminatory attitudes.
Former South Bend, Indiana Mayor and 2020 hopeful Pete Buttigieg on Fox News Sunday. The Nevada Democratic caucuses are coming up this Saturday. Early voting began this past weekend. Hundreds of Americans quarantined on a cruise ship in Japan because of the coronavirus are expected back on flights early this morning to a pair of U.S. Air Force bases for another 14-day quarantine.
Right now, there are 24 countries in which there are over 500 cases. Several of them are starting to get to the second and third transmission. So, technically speaking, the WHO wouldn't be calling this a global pandemic, but it certainly is on the verge of that happening reasonably soon unless containment is more successful than it is right now.
Dr. Anthony Fauci with the National Institutes of Health on CBS's Face the Nation. There are now more than 70,000 coronavirus cases in China and over 1,700 deaths as a result. President Trump serving as Grand Marshal of NASCAR's iconic Daytona 500 Sunday in Daytona Beach, Florida.
To all of the drivers, technicians, and pit crews here today, good luck, and may the best team win. God bless you. God bless our military. God bless our veterans, and God bless America.
That audio from Fox Sports. The president then giving drivers the start your engines command. Rain, though, stopping the race till Monday afternoon at 4 Eastern Time. America's listening to Fox News.
Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro in the Grand Plaza Hotel in Tumon is stirring up some of your favorite drinks all night long. Come down on Wednesday and Friday nights from 5:30 to 10 p.m. Indulge in some of your favorite local cuisine and pair it with your favorite drink. From our ice-cold beers, our finest selection of wines and liquors, to our top-notch cocktail specials, your friends at Mezcla Bistro Tumon are ready to serve you. Why limit happy to only an hour? The Mezcla family reminds everyone to drink responsibly. See you on Wednesday and Friday night.
Yikes, are those Christmas bills coming in? Wait, hold on, that was last month. Now it's this month. But by popular demand, we're extending our New Year's solution 4.65% personal loan through February. Money for whatever you want at 4.65% APR from Bank Pacific. We're still celebrating.
Bank Pacific, where others put branches, we place roots.
Equal credit opportunity lender as low as 4.65%. Conditions apply.
People in and around Jackson, Mississippi are bracing for more flooding as the rain-swollen Pearl River continues to rise. A crest of about 37.5 feet expected for the Pearl sometime Monday. More expected rain will likely keep the river high for another 3 or 4 days. Indiana police are trying to stop online rumors about a pair of 2017 murders.
It's been 3 years since Abby Williams and Libby German were killed along a Delphi, Indiana walking trail. With 50,000 tips, hundreds of people investigated, and it's online sleuths who attach names and faces to online gossip that Indiana State Police Sergeant John Perrine says are becoming a potential problem.
It could not only be detrimental to innocent people, but it could harm the case as well.
Some online groups have upwards of 20,000 members with accusations against people that run rampant.
That person's name is forever connected to the Delphi case, even if they have nothing to do with it.
Investigators stress that if you have a tip in the case, to send it to police. Jeff Manasso, Fox News.
Sonic the Hedgehog showing some might, coming in #1 at the weekend movie box office.
Sonic the Hedgehog, an $87 million production, co-stars Jim Carrey and Ben Schwartz. It had a $57 million debut.
I'm Sonic, a little ball of super energy in an extremely handsome package.
Harley Quinn, Birds of Prey, was second. Fantasy Island, the horror remake of the 70s TV show, came in third with $12 million despite poor reviews.
This weekend, you will be our guests. Here, anything and everything is possible.
No service. It's not everything is possible.
The Photograph, a romance starring Issa Rae, is fourth.
That's Fox's Debbie Hanley. 72-year-old Sir Elton John planning to play his remaining shows in New Zealand after illness caused him to lose his voice and cut short a show recently. I'm Paul Stevens. This is Fox News.
Hafa Guam, we'd like to invite you to join us February 23 for the Guahan Festival of Hope with Franklin Graham at the Guam Football Association soccer field next to Dedido Sports Complex. Franklin Graham will be on Guam to share a life-changing message of God's love and hope for every one of us. This hope-filled event will also feature musical performances by Grammy Award-winning singer-songwriter Michael W. Smith. Tommy Coombs Band, and Dennis Agianian. Don't miss this free once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Come join us for an afternoon of music and a life-changing message of God's love and hope on February 23 at the Guam Football Association soccer field, starting at 4:30 p.m. Gates open at 3:30 p.m. Admission is free. For additional information and updates, visit us and like our Facebook page at Guahan Festival of Hope. See you there. God bless you and God bless Guam.
Hafa, this is Congressman Michael Nicholas. Our veterans deserve the best, and I'm working hard to make sure they receive what they earned defending our freedom. If you need help receiving the benefits you earned from the VA or the Defense Department, please call my office at 475-6453 or go online at stnicholas.house.gov. On behalf of a grateful community, thank you for your service.
This ad was paid for with official funds from the office of Congressman Michael Nicholas.
Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie is brought to you by Bank Pacific, banking on the Pacific for 65 years.
Okay, another terrific halftime show here on Tall Tales. We do this every afternoon at 1700. If you don't like any of the rest of the show, I don't know. How could that be? How could anybody not like Tall Tales? 7 billion people in the world. I suppose there's somebody out there that doesn't. By the way, I noticed our international radio listening audience, we've got somebody from, Mark Elegino is tuned in from Cebu in the Philippines. And I got a pretty good post here from Jose Martinez that is right on point with what we're talking about here as far as abortion, et cetera. And Jose Martinez picks up with Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood, I think statistically does more abortions than any other group in the United States. It's a big outfit. It was started by Margaret Sanger back around the turn of the last century, primarily to improve the human race, to eliminate certain elements from the human race. And there's a great movie about Planned Parenthood called Unplanned that really kind of stripped the facade from Planned Parenthood and showed that Planned Parenthood is a money-making enterprise, even though it's a nonprofit. You know, the trick with nonprofits is that although the enterprise itself doesn't show a profit, it oftentimes is able to pay large salaries to its officers and employees. And that's certainly the case with Planned Parenthood. So Jose comes along and says that Planned Parenthood refuses to set up an abortion clinic on Guam. Not because it's cruelly, culturally insensitive, and not because it would receive opposition from the Catholic Church on Guam, but because there is no money to be made performing abortions on Guam. The market just isn't big enough. So they're not coming. You know? If everybody was on Guam were a vegetarian, you probably wouldn't find McDonald's here, right? Okay, so I got a call from James, our Saipan listening audience. Good afternoon, James.
Good afternoon, Bob. Here's a different point of view and maybe an opinion for you. I'm not a doctor, and I'm certainly not a lawyer or an attorney.
Lucky
but
you.
As an engineer, I can pretty much assure you that at some point in time, common sense will kick in. Now, that common sense will kick in whether you choose to adhere to it or whether you choose to follow it or not. But, you know, it's kind of like math. Politicians and people with agendas lie, but the numbers don't lie. So let's take the church completely out of the scenario. Catholic, Baptist, Lutheran, Seventh-day. Let's just take the church out of the scenario, and let's just say that maybe the separation of church and state might apply there because the church really shouldn't be able to dictate quote-unquote legal policies. What does a young lady who's been raped and gets pregnant do? What does a young mother who seriously wants that baby, would do anything in the world for that baby, but is determined to have some type of a medical issue that may cause grave danger not only to her but to the unborn? What does a young lady do who's just made a mistake and she's gotten herself pregnant? She's actually done the right thing the right way. She's talked with her parents about it. She's talked with her family. She's maybe even fortunate enough to be in a situation where she's had a discussion with the young man who's responsible for it. And everybody is basically just, you know, saying, hey, look, you did this and you're stuck with it and this is what you've got to do. You're 15 years old and you're going to destroy your life, or at least the first part of your life, by having this child, but it's your responsibility. You have to do that. Well, I don't know, Bob. I'm religious. I believe in God, but there's a lot of folks out there that have different religions. Not everybody's, some people are Buddhist, some people are, whatever. But here again, I'm not going to tell a woman who's actually sought guidance, proper guidance and counseling, what she can and can't do with her body up to a point. Now, this is where the common sense part kicks in. We know that fetuses can start to feel at a certain point during the pregnancy, and I could be very incorrect on this, but I think it's the second trimester. What I disagree with,
I think it's 20 weeks, I think.
Okay. And what I disagree with is what they're pushing now about letting somebody abort a child right up to the point of giving birth. That's not, quote unquote, a fetus anymore. That's just an unborn person. They can feel, okay? When they're being removed, when the abortion is being performed, that little unborn child is exactly that. It's in the in-between stage of actually legally, quote unquote, being born and being a person, but it's very far beyond in development past a fetus, and it can feel. Okay, at that point, we as human beings need to listen to common sense and say, whoa, wait a minute. This has gone too far, and this is not a fetus anymore. This is a child, okay? And no, we're not going to do this. That's wrong, okay? Because, and you mentioned this the other day on the show, there's kind of a double standard here. If a woman is murdered that's pregnant, a lot of times the person who did it is charged with a double homicide. Okay, so where are we making the distinction between an unborn child that can qualify as a homicide versus just a fetus that really is not developed and evolved to the state yet where it has no feelings and it may or may not have conscience? We don't know for sure. So I think there needs to be a separation between the church and legal policy, but at the same time, common sense is not that common anymore, unfortunately, and I think we're overlooking a big part of this. I think there should be a choice, especially, there are locations, there's places where, it's forbidden to have abortions, but there are circumstances where it should be permissible under those circumstances. But if a woman wants to make the choice, I don't like it, but I'm not going to force my will and my thoughts and opinions on somebody else based off of a religious policy. Religion religion and the churches, all of them, take your pick, whichever religion you want to talk about. They are the morality police. That's what they do. And it's a good thing. I totally agree with it. Do unto others and the Golden Rule and the Ten Commandments have always been part of my life. But the church needs to step aside from being the actual real legal police. They already have the realm of the morality police. I don't know that religion really needs, sure, of course, it's an opinion, but how far does it go into actual legal policy and course?
Well, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to answer your question, but a couple of prefaces. First of all, common sense generally is the tag that a person hangs on his own set of beliefs and opinions. So common sense is basically the way I think things should be done. People who aren't able to understand that are actually lacking in common sense, Mark. James. One, and then two. Let's run through a few. Let's run through a few hypotheticals, okay? What about a woman in her early 20s who's just graduated from high school and might have a pretty star-studded career ahead of her? Someone who looks like she has a lot of potential, and she has a boyfriend, and she gets pregnant. And if she gets pregnant and carries the child to term, it's really going to interfere with her career. Shouldn't she have the choice to be able to abort that child and then go on with her career, and then later on maybe she could come back and have a child? That'd be first hypothetical. Second hypothetical, what about the woman who's in a marriage? Now, this would work either way. People in a marriage who stray from the marriage and accidentally impregnate someone else or become impregnated by someone else. And if that pregnancy came to life, you know, it would not only ruin the life of the impregnator or the impregnatee, but everybody else in that whole lash-up. It would just spoil everything for two couples. Wouldn't that be a good situation for an abortion? What about someone who has plans for life but doesn't have much money, but is sexually active and becomes pregnant? Wouldn't an abortion make a certain amount of sense there?
Well, I think that's the reason why they call it choice. You know, there's a lot of things that play into all of those scenarios.
So there can be no bad choice then. There could never be a bad choice. I'm a female. I want to have an abortion because having a child right now is just too inconvenient for me. I'm a female. I want to have an abortion because someone other than my husband is the father of the child I want to carry. Therefore, abortion, yeah, woman's choice. Let the woman decide. Forget about the baby.
Well, and there again, I think that's where it comes into, you know, proper guidance and counseling. Have they explored all the options? Yeah, I mean, okay, so
there are two
they
basic options. You know, James, there are two basic options: have the child or have an abortion. Those are the options.
Well, there's also carrying it to term and then putting it up for adoption. That's
the first one. That's not having an abortion.
Oh, okay, all right. Well, I don't know.
And the point I'm trying to make here is that you can construct hypotheticals that will lead you down a lot of different places.
Sure, absolutely.
And then when you talk about religion, it is the job description of religious people who really are religious, who have embraced the doctrine of their faith. It's their job description to make other people aware of what their doctrine is, and it's part of a religious person's duty to inform politicians that are going to enact laws that, in accordance with the thinking of that person, are wrong, to step forward and say, you shouldn't do that. You know, some places it's been gambling, it's been other things where churches level their authority. But if you stop and examine the law, you know, just about every society of humans that has ever come along has had something pretty similar to the Ten Commandments. Maybe they had 9 or 11. The wording was a little different, but, you know, humans pretty much stumble across this themselves, that you shouldn't kill. So you start out with a proposition: are there some things that are universally true, no matter what the situation is? Or do you say, well, yeah, there are these things that we kind of like, but we have to depend on the situation. So morality is actually situational. It's not something that it can be predetermined to set a standard for people to live by. It's really situational, because that's what you're saying, James.
No, that's exactly what I'm saying, Bob.
And
not
I'm
everybody
saying,
believes the same thing. Okay, what if a young lady steps up and says, "Well, I'm Buddhist, or I'm this, or I'm that, or I'm whatever, or I'm non-denominational. I don't believe in God."
What difference would it
Then
make? What difference would it make?
Exactly. That's what I'm saying.
Well, if it's wrong,
it's an opinion, not a legal basis of fact.
So if a person came along and says, "I am an XYZ religion, and our religion, human sacrifice is really important. So we always sacrifice the firstborn when he turns 12 years old. It's part of our religion." That's okay, right?
Well, yeah, it gets sticky, Bob, and I understand what you're saying. The point that I was trying to get across is that not everyone has the same opinion. And we've set a standard based on legal policy that, quote unquote, it's not a person until it's born, okay? And I think that's one of the issues.
Well,
okay?
It's also wrong. Without going into a long legal history argument here, this whole idea of abortion and other things like it is made up. There's no legal foundation for it. There's no moral foundation. It all goes back to a case called Griswold versus Connecticut, and another case called Poe versus Ullman. Connecticut had a law that said it was illegal to sell birth control devices. That law was not enforced for 60 years. But there was a made-up case. A couple of lefty academics set up a case so that a couple people could get arrested for proclaiming the necessity of birth control. And that case went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, well, yes, that would be a denial of that person's constitutional right, and the constitutional right involved was the right to privacy. Now, if you have the United States Constitution in a Word document, run a search and replace, you won't find the word privacy in the Constitution. It was just a couple of liberal justices said, well, there is a right to privacy. It's in the penumbra of the Bill of Rights. And therefore, that in Griswold versus Connecticut, the Connecticut law fell. And when it came time for Roe versus Wade, even though the Supreme Court had decided earlier, Skinner versus Oklahoma, that giving birth is a fundamental right, they went with the Griswold rule and said, yeah, a woman has a right to privacy. A woman does not have a right to privacy when it means taking another human life. Now, you can quibble about, well, when is it human life and when is it not? And there's this, well, it's a woman's own body. It's not a woman's own body. Anybody will tell you that from the time you start out with a zygote, it's not the woman's body anymore. So, you can have a society that has set standards in place that have, a 2,000-year pedigree, or you can say, well, no, it should be choice. You got to consider the situation, whether or not it's inconvenient for the mother and all of these other things. And what you wind up with is a moral dilemma that is destructive of the building blocks of society. The building blocks of society is the family. And
I agree with that totally.
And we're living in a time right now where the left is doing every single thing it can to destroy the family so that it can achieve its own ends. And abortion is really a big part of that. The commies, Karl Marx and the commies were big on abortion.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with any of that. In fact, I think abortion is wrong. I personally, as a responsible adult, I'm not going to have a family larger than what I can. My father used to tell me, don't have more kids than you can feed. Okay, that was common sense. Okay, but I'm more or less, I'm bringing to light the point that based off of some legal points that have already been established, such as it's quote unquote, it's not a person until it's born, et cetera, et cetera. And, you know, if they change the law and they say, no, from the moment that a woman becomes pregnant, she's carrying another human life, and that life is sacred, and that life has a right to live, I'm all for it. I don't think abortion is a good thing. I think it's a bad thing. But the conundrum that they've placed with everyone, and I believe the window of opportunity where all the leftists come in, like you said, you know, the crazies come out of the woodwork with every typical type of scenario. There's a couple of scenarios that really stand, like the one where, you know, I mentioned if there's a woman and there's a very good possibility that she may not survive the delivery and or the child, both. You know, a few things like that. But, you know, like you said, once you start down that rabbit hole of scenarios and morality and you mix the two together, the rabbit hole just keeps getting deeper and deeper. But I think what would go a long way would be to go back in and examine some of these laws that we've had. Like I said, if a pregnant woman is killed, the person who killed her is usually charged with a double homicide. That's kind of a quasi-double standard. Wait a minute, it hasn't been born yet, so legally it's not a person. But you're going to charge somebody with murder of that? Well, personally, I think it should be that. That's exactly the point that I'm trying to make. Lack of common sense and application of common sense is requiring maybe a little bit of legal policy to come into play. And I would personally love to see a ruling.
Here's something else.
Once a woman starts carrying a child, that child is a child, period.
Here's something else. Here's something else to think about, James. You know, that our government, which started out as a representative democracy, has turned into a critarchy, a government by judges. So
that's true.
We've had 9 politicians in black robes make decisions like Roe versus Wade. There's no common sense involved at all.
Yep.
It was something that, you know, the left, primarily Judge William O. Douglas, was able to pull out a rabbit that he pulled out of his hat. And it can change, but it's very difficult to change Supreme Court precedent that's been on the books since 1972. But the fact that Supreme Court says it's that particular way is small comfort to me, because I don't have any faith in the Supreme Court. Got to take a break, James, but thanks for calling. Good conversation.
You bet.
Okay, we'll go to the 7th inning stretch, and then I'm going to pick up another Joe wants to ride on the Ferris wheel. Another Joe, you're going to get dizzy riding on the Ferris wheel.
Another ride for another Joe.
Family Finance has been serving the people of Guam since 1959, and they'll continue to be there for you in the years to come. Whether you're looking to get a personal loan for that summer vacation or paying off those long overdue bills, Family Finance has got you covered. Apply for a personal loan from $1,000 up to $3,600 by calling Family Finance in Hagåtña at 475-4545, Upper Tumon at 647-5626, or in Dededo, 633-4473. Family Finance, serving the people of Guam since 1959.
When an apology isn't really an apology, and the effect that can have on the workplace. I'm Jerry Roberts, and at 7:20 a.m. on The Ray Gibson Show, we'll learn a valuable lesson from a company that apparently has learned nothing from a very public lesson they should have learned from.
You can find daily transcripts of The Extra Point at GuamTraining.com. Tune in every weekday morning at 7:20 for The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts, brought to you by Guahan Insurance Services and First Hawaiian Bank on 93.3 The Point.
Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie is brought to you by Mescla. Try their featured special for February. Shrimp hash-crusted parrotfish, succulent parrotfish fillets, crusted with a shrimp farce, twice cooked, served over basil-laced sweet potato croquet, and a crab and corn bisque sauce. Visit Mescla in Hagåtña and now in Tumon at the Grand Plaza Hotel. For reservations, please call 969-2652.
Okay, seventh inning stretch. So here we are back on Tall Tales again. I've got another Joe on line 1, and I've got our Carl on line 2. So another Joe, since you've already had 2 rides on the Ferris wheel, I'm going to let our Carl get on the Ferris wheel first. And when he's been around 20 times or so, I'll let you get on. But I want to go to some of the Facebook comments here. Some of them are pretty good. Here's something that Jose points out. I'm reading from a document called the Unanimous Declaration of the 13 United States of America, beginning with the second paragraph. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Created equal. Doesn't say born equal. It says all men are created equal. Yeah, I know, this is just an old piece of paper that's been laying around since the 4th of July, 1776. We're so much smarter now. We know so much more. We're so much more scientific. So why should we pay any attention to these old standards that have been around for so long? But good point, Jose. Brad Hewitt says separation from church from state actually means separation of state and church, meaning the state can't dictate to the church, and development of the national state-run church. The church can and should poke their nose in government business as often possible to keep the government in order. And that's absolutely correct. The First Amendment is to protect religion from the state. It's not to keep the two separate. And once again, to read the First Amendment, this is exactly what it says. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. Now, an establishment of religion means an official state church. As in, for instance, in England, the official state church is the Church of England. So when the 13 colonies were established, there were official state churches in the states. Massachusetts had a state religion until 1820, but the First Amendment prohibited the national government from establishing religion. But the First Amendment goes on to say, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So the free exercise thereof is the church attempting to influence the government. We would hope to remind the government that the basis for law is morality. Law doesn't exist by itself. The basis of law is morality. Let's see, there were a couple other pretty good ones here, too. Jose says, no matter the hypothetical, the only common factor is that a human unborn baby is one awaiting either death or life, death sentence or life. And somebody put, posited that the Plan B pill is the answer. And Jose says the Plan B is an abortion. It does not stop conception. It destroys the uterine lining so that a newly conceived human cannot attach to it. And Jesse Limptiaco comes back and says, can you be considered a snowflake if you're blaming the left? Ha ha. If that's the case, then I'm a snowflake, because I can find some way to blame the left for just about anything. Ishmael Velez Counterzone says, no, Jesse, snowflake is a term referencing the left. The right is an ice cube. Good call, just Ishmael. To which Jose says that's stone cold, Ishmael. And then Brad Hewitt, hospitals regularly use this for assault victims. Conception is not immediate and usual circumstances, that's why Plan B is effective and not actually abortion, especially if provided before conception could be possible. Well, I don't know about that. Jose Martinez says statistics say otherwise. And then somebody here said, remember the time of the teacher strike? Separation of church and state has been a real constitutional backbone. I don't know what the teacher strike had to do with church and state. Yeah. Anyhow, very good discussion on an extremely important issue. Believe it or not, this issue might be more important than the color of our two swimming pools right now. So, and that's the function of Tall Tales, to bring about discussion on important issues. And you know how we decide what important issues are? You know, Real Joe Cruz? I decide. Yeah.
Very good, sir.
Yeah, kind of the local equivalent of Michael Bavacqua. I decide how these things
That's good
go.
enough for me, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Real Joe Cruz. Okay, our Carl, what can you tell me about abortion?
Hello?
Hello? Oh, our Carl's on one, huh? Hello, our Carl, what can you tell me about abortion?
Oh, there I am. Yeah, this was interesting. You know, when I was driving around listening to the discussion, this hits kind of close to home. My late wife, when I met her, you know, she had her first child out of wedlock, and that became, of course, my stepdaughter. And I was always very proud of my wife making that decision. It's extremely hard raising a child. You know, there's no doubt about it. And then my stepdaughter also had a child out of wedlock, and she chose to have to give birth to the child. And I told her many times that I was really very proud of her decision to give birth to the child. And for a while I was a social worker working in the local child welfare services, and that made an impression on me of how badly some people want to adopt children. I think you mentioned that there's like a 5-year waiting list on Guam right now.
That's what I understand, yeah.
Yeah, so the demand is there, you know, and there are people who desperately want children. One thing I think about is that since Roe versus Wade, there have been over 61 million abortions, and I just wondered how many of those were dismemberment abortions, where they have to basically take the child, they insert a clamp in and crush the infant's skull and then dismember the infant a part at a time. And they have to be careful. They have to count all the limbs and, you know, the legs and the arms and the head and everything after they do this, to make sure there are no parts still in there that will start rotting and cause infection. So it's a pretty brutal process, you know, and as you mentioned, after 20 weeks, and these dismemberment abortions are done later in the development of the child, which is why there's all these, you know, limbs that are formed. So, these are some of the thoughts that have been crossing my mind on the issue. I think one of the reasons why abortion is such a foundational issue to the left is that it coincides with radical environmentalism and the preservation of resources, which is a huge thing for the left, you know, saving the resources for the living. And so the less people alive, I heard from someone that someone on the left are actually proposing that a target population would be 500 million, as a sustainable population figure that we should aim for. And so that population reduction has to come from somewhere, and I guess abortion is one of those means of radical population reduction.
True enough, Carl.
Yeah, so anyway, those are just some of my thoughts. I also saw a post on Facebook in which a doctor who had delivered over 5,000 babies said he had never run across a single case in all that time in which the mother's life was threatened and they absolutely needed to abort a baby. And I messaged a local doctor who has done probably one of the most well-known obgyns on Guam, that deals with that births. And I posed the same question to him. Have you ever in your career run across a case like that? And he said not in 28 years. He had not come across one where it was absolutely necessary to sacrifice the baby's life for the mother. I'm not saying that doesn't happen. I'm just saying it's really rare.
It's not something. It's not something to build a rule on. In other words, right?
No, it's not. Yeah. So anyway, these are just some thoughts I'd toss out there into the conversation. It's very interesting. I've really been fascinated by your comments and the people who have called in. I've learned quite a bit. Anyway, I'll let you go. That's just some of my thoughts.
Okay, well, I've got another Joe hanging on here, so thanks for calling, Carl.
All right.
Okay, another Joe. Climb in the seat here and let me pull this bar across you so you don't fall out. Okay, turn the Ferris wheel on, Real Joe Cruz.
Right away, sir.
All right, goodbye. So, what was the caller's name that from CNMI again?
James.
Okay, so my first impression was James was testing you to see what you're made of, and found out that you're the silverback gorilla around here, and there can't be competition because he just doesn't have what it takes to run you out. That's just a theory. If he was fishing, it just seemed like he was fishing. But to give him the benefit of the doubt, he unloaded a lot of stuff there in Kebab. I mean, talking about fishing, talking about separation of church and state, and these hypotheticals he came out with a 15-year-old girl. My first thought, if it's a 15-year-old girl, don't the parents have some say in the minor's choice of her, what happens to her health? I'd be concerned if the 15-year-old girl is the one who wants to keep the baby, but the parents want her to have an abortion. Then I think that becomes more complicated, because it would seem as though she should have some influence in being allowed to save the baby. That's the only thing I could see as a complication.
As I understand the law right now, the parents don't have anything to say about whether or not the 15-year-old gets an abortion. Strange as it may seem, in order for the 15-year-old to take an aspirin at school, she'd have to have a notarized note from her mom, but she could walk down to the local abortionist and get an abortion, and her parents wouldn't even know about it. That's how far. When you start out with a premise that's wrong on its face, that's what happens. That's how things get completely out of control.
So back to the thing he's talking about, the separation of church. And then you brought up. I was glad you brought up. It seems as though it's more of an issue of excluding our faith, our religions, right, from our everyday life with government, with policies that influence our lives. And it's not that obvious to about, but when it becomes an issue of a single payer health system, and you got everyone has to pitch in and pay, and then you're encouraging young single ladies to use abortion as a form of birth control, as opposed to a last measure. And I think this came out in the 90s, where they wanted to identify what would be advisable or acceptable, and it became the rape, incest, and the health of the mother would be issues that could be addressed with regards to whether the impregnee or impregnated would be allowed to legally have an abortion. And so in those cases, you can understand, a woman has been raped, there's a lot of mental anguish. And so in society, it would seem as though at this snapshot moment, we are a little bit more accepting of the idea of, well, she was raped for sure, she was assaulted. And so if she's chosen to abort this baby, that's her choice, as opposed to whether or not is not economically agreeable with her.
Well, look at it this way, another Joe. Consider what some societal norms are, irrespective of religion. I think you would agree with me that a society has a duty to protect its weakest members, right?
Yes.
Yeah, we have all kinds of laws. Just reading in the paper or reading on a website that, we have laws that if you're not 18 years old, you can't serve alcohol. If you're not 21, you can't drink it. We have child labor laws, so we go to great lengths to protect children because they're the weaker members of society, and society feels a duty to defend its weakest members. Well,
so it's hypocritical to have the abortion.
So what is weaker and more defenseless than a baby?
The unborn child.
And an unborn child. So the child, to execute the child because of the way the child was created, that might be great for the mother, but it's kind of a heavy burden to place on the poor child, isn't it?
Yes. But come on, one important factor before I let you all go is the demographic seems to be left out of the equation often are the guys. Now, if you are responsible for the impregnated lady, wouldn't it seem as though you should have the some knowledge beforehand, or at least or after the fact of an abortion being performed? And also, as a guy that pays taxes, if you're going to tax everyone, and it becomes a single payer system because they want to be socialists, shouldn't you have a say whether or not you want your money to be going to all these abortions because the young lady did not effectively plan in ahead of advance with contraception, and it's just more convenient to have an abortion as a form of birth control? If it becomes so expensive, shouldn't young guys know what the expense is and decide whether or not they like the idea of that much money spent on abortions?
Right now, the current state of the law is that the father of an unborn child has no role whatsoever in determining whether that child will live to term. Real Joe Cruz. Another Joe. I'm going to pick this up. I'm going to pick this up after down the home stretch here. We may finish the program on this.
If you own a Toyota, please listen to this. It could help you avoid injury, maybe save your life. The Takata airbags installed in certain Toyotas can explode and shoot out sharp metal fragments at people inside the vehicle. You don't need to be in a collision. They could explode any time. In the U.S., these airbags have caused 26 deaths. There's been a worldwide recall of Takata airbags, and most have had the faulty parts replaced. But here in Guam, there are still over 3,000 Toyotas on the road with potentially lethal airbags, and yours could be one of them. So please, take your Toyota to Atkins Grow, even if you didn't buy it from us, and get the inflator replaced. It costs you nothing, it takes just about an hour, and it could save a life, yours or someone you love. The AK song says we're here for life. That's never been more true.
At Atkins Grow, we're here.
Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie is brought to you by Bank Pacific, banking on the Pacific for 65 years.
So here we are, grandstand, Churchill Downs, Louisville, Kentucky, the home stretch. Means I got about 7 more minutes to go till the end of the program today. I've got a Robert on the... This isn't me.
No, it's not, sir. I hope not.
It's probably his name is Robert. It's probably another genius.
Another Robert. Yeah, another genius.
Another genius. Good afternoon, Robert.
Hey, hi, Robert. Hey, thanks. The topic, I've just been listening to it, just driving, and I just wanted to say a couple of things about it. Hello.
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I guess it is a contentious issue, and it's going to be a contentious issue until the end of time, because it does fall under one. As much as people don't want to admit or face the fact that it does fall on the line that God did create life, and He is life. I mean, a lot of people hate to hear that so-called religious part of it, but that's the whole bottom line. I mean, when Cain killed Abel, the blood of Abel was screaming from the ground, and God asked him what he did, and God already knew. I mean, I don't think people realize that. I can't even imagine. That's one person screaming, the blood of one person screaming from the ground. What more 60 to 70 million babies? So it's a very contentious issue. It's a very difficult issue for a lot of women, but they should look at it from that perspective. How would you feel if you're the God that created all this life, yet you want to kill little innocent children? That's all I wanted to say, Robert. That's it.
Very good, Robert. Hang on just a second. I have something that Ishmael posted that I think you can appreciate. Abortion is a deliberate termination of human pregnancy, meaning you are ultimately terminating a human. There is a soul in that unborn child.
Absolutely.
Termination of that pregnancy is termination of an innocent soul. But for those who don't believe in God, there is no strike on their conscience for terminating an abortion. In other words, if you're pro-abortion, you really got to stop and ask yourself, do I actually have a conscience?
It's a good point. You're right. And I think the saddest part is that there are a bunch of folks who, I don't know, maybe they don't have a conscience. And I think that's the most disturbing part of the whole, the whole issue, at this point in time in our history. And I don't know. I just think that, it's an issue of you maintain sin in the land, and there's going to be a curse, because the God who created the land and created the world and created life is not going to stand for sin to be constantly coming into the land. And for us to heal our land, we need to stop and move on from that and just stop doing the wrong things. And that's all I have to say, Robert. But I had to let that off my chest because I was just listening to your entire conversation.
I'm glad you did, Robert. And that's the function of Tall Tales, to allow people to get things off your chest. You did it in a very articulate and admirable fashion. So thank you very much for calling Tall Tales.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. Have a good night.
So you can always tell a Robert, but you can't tell him much, Real Joe Cruz.
It's true, sir. All of this talk about this subject reminded me of something you said. I don't know, maybe it was weeks ago, but you said something about, what if that child is a child that figures out the cure for cancer?
Yeah.
And what if that child is the next Tesla or the next Picasso, or, there's something there.
Yeah, and the odds, we've killed 60 million of them before they could be born. What wonderful things did we dispose of?
Yeah, we missed out on.
Yeah, because of women's reproductive health. There's one other thing I wanted to add in here, and picking up on what Robert said, Robert understands the concept of Christianity. And, of course, nowadays the last minority or the last group of people that it's okay to discriminate against is Christians. You can't with homosexuals, anybody of any particular color, but white Christians are certainly fair game. So anyone who comes along and says, this is what I believe because I'm a Christian, is immediately subject to criticism. And as far as the society we live in, so much of our society has been constructed to give people who may have started out with a conscience, but it had it so dimmed, you know, by the mainstream media, by the laws, by the Supreme Court, etc., so that they think, well, yeah, maybe it is actually killing a person, but it's okay because this, that, and, you know, the Supreme Court and this movie and on and on and on and on. And then the little catch lines like a woman's reproductive health, and a woman has a right to do what she wants to with her own body, and it's female rights, etc. But, you know, and women, female empowerment. But actually, if you stop to think about it, it isn't. The abortion on demand is something that really favors males, because males used to have some responsibility for fathering, for being fathers to the children that they created. But nowadays, it's very easy for a man to say to the woman, well, if you wanted to have the baby, fine. You just didn't want to have an abortion. What's that got to do with me? No harm, no foul. Adios, senorita. Okay, well, we'll be back tomorrow. We'll probably talk a little bit about abortion, and we'll talk about the other super interesting things that our international radio listening audience always wants to groove on. So I'll see you tomorrow.
The Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
Landing back home, I'm Paul Stevens, Fox News. The first of over 300 U.S. citizens and their immediate family members now arriving back on U.S. soil after being